Hi. Remote, hybrid, or just in the office, where and when we get our jobs done has become probably the biggest workplace debate of our times. It's something that's continually talked about as well, even more than the weather, I think, these days. It's certainly the talk at our manager meetings, at our one-to-ones, of our partners, and of our customers. And if you guys are joining us today, either live or on catch up, and I'm guessing it's top of mind for you as well. If we think about where we are now, we're in a very different place to what we were in at the height of the COVID pandemic. This week, of course, we've been dealt the blow of one of the biggest tube and train strikes in recent history, which is again forcing many of us, certainly many in my panel today, to be working from home again, which, if anything, is going to continue to push this hybrid remote work agenda even further. And this debate about hybrid work is a really interesting one, as the last 2 years has really taught us that a huge percentage of our workforce can be far more efficient and have a better work-life balance with more remote working in their week. Though I think many managers still struggle with this concept and are trying to push and encourage people back into the office, often without thinking about the reasons why. This combined with the demand for talent and this enthusiasm and demand even for remote working has made it really hard for companies to enforce any form of return to work mandate. And anyone that's started a new job with a new company in the last couple of years, we've certainly had 30 or 40 that have joined us in the last couple of years alone, have only really known a remote or at least a hybrid work mode in all their time. We have teams of people that have joined us in the last 2 years that have never been to some of our offices because they've never been able to or had a reason to. So I think whether we like it or not, hybrid and remote work is the new normal, right? And it impacts far more than just the office space and the meeting technology and the commute and those things that we need to think about. It's commanding a total rethink about our existing and future employees. And I think for much has put more power and influence into the hands of our employers and future employees than it probably ever has done before. And, we struggle with that, right? Change is a hard thing to overcome, especially when it's so rapid. So today's discussion is all about one of the most important outcomes and challenges of this biggest of this work shift, and that is how to survive the Great Resignation. So why this agenda? You might be sick of this, but I think we keep hearing about the Great Resignation. We've been talking about it for about 18 months, or the Great Reset as it's now becoming known, I think. But I'm sure you'll agree, it's far more than just hype. We're certainly seeing it. We were quite proud and arrogant, I think, at the beginning. We were seeing probably lower attrition rates than the industry for a while, but that's started to change now. And we are certainly questioning what and why and what we do about it. There's right now we're in the middle of a UK-wide 4-day working week trial with 60 or 70 companies involved, and other organisations that I know, particularly finance and banking, are looking at these 9-day fortnights, where you work longer hours but have a day off once every 2 weeks. And things like this are going to continually push the boundaries of this traditional Monday to Friday 9 to 5 working week. Many of the organisations that we speak to are still really struggling with what to do about hybrid work. Is it a fad? Will it gradually revert back? What will people really do? Once the city gets busy and everyone's coming to London for drinks, everyone will flock back to the office. We don't want to spend all this money on meeting room technology and refurbs if it's all going to go back to how it was before. And of course, there's been numerous studies around this, right, by government bodies, Department of Work and Pensions, for example, Cisco, Microsoft, Accenture, you name it. Everybody is trying to understand what's going on in the hearts and minds of employers, managers around this future of work. One such report that I find really interesting and really visual is the Work Trend Index report, which I'm sure many of you have seen. This was last updated just a couple of months ago in April, and some of the key themes that came out of this are really interesting. This is kind of what we're going to pick up and talk about a bit today. But they talk about employees having this worth it equation, right? Which is really about if I look at everything that I've got today, the life balance that I've got, my job, my pay, my commute, all of those things, is it worth it, right? And I think as employees gauge and understand their options, do I want to start paying a couple of £1,000 a year again to travel into the office? Do I want to not be able to do certain things with my children, before and after school? Do I miss the time in the office? Do I want to be back in the office to actually, collaborate better with people and have the social time that I've kind of missed? There's definitely a feel, and we see this, between what leadership and employees' expectations are around hybrid work and remote work, and people tend to have a slightly different opinion of what that means. We as leaders and managers need to make the office worth it, right? If people are going to now give up their time, as many are thinking about it, as coming into the office, it's got to be worth it. There's got to be a reason to come in other than just to sit at your desk and do video calls all day. And this point about flexibility becomes really important. It does mean a different thing to different people. We might see people working split hours. We might have people working in different locations. People may have moved during the pandemic. So we need to be careful that if people are working different shifts, then that doesn't mean that you're on all the time and you're working all the time, and therefore work just bleeds into your kind of personal life. And then we have to really think about rebuilding what this social capital, as they call it, looks like, which is just everything we've got and we feel. What is that about? What is important? How do we get the important time? What is the destination of the office? Does that now change? Does the office not become a place that we work? So there's loads of things that we really need to think about. Anyway, without further ado, my name is Rob Quickenden. I'm the CTO here at Cisilion, and we're going to dig into some of these areas today with our panel of representatives from our customer advisory board. So team, hello. Sorry about my rambling on that topic. Please, if you wouldn't mind, just quickly introducing yourself for our guests. I'll quickly go around the table and then we'll get going on the chat. David.
Helps you push the unmute button. So David Maskell, IT Services Manager at Thatcham Research.
Thank you. Roland.
I'm Roland Hills. I'm COO at Leithwaite.
Madassel.
Hi, I'm Madassel Hack. I'm CIO for Waite Investment Management.
Paul Clark.
Hi, I'm Paul Clark. I'm Director of Enterprise Services and Security at the L&Q Group.
And Alex.
Hi, Alex Taylor, Group IT Director for AWIN.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, if we kick off, then, we've been talking about this work trend index report for a couple of minutes, and if we think about these the attrition rates, right, that organisations are reporting, I'm really keen to understand how that's affecting your organisation so far. So, is it a big thing? Is it a myth? Has it changed? Do you expect it to change? Madassel, do you want to give me a heads up of what you're seeing?
I guess within Waverton, we've observed the need for very much the home working and hybrid working model. We undertook a survey back in 2019, and there was this very much a need to introduce this offering, and this was pre-pandemic, and I suppose that very much drove our decision to fulfill staff needs and requests, and very much to introduce a model that allowed staff to effectively work from home and obviously within the office. And naturally, the pandemic has allowed us to demonstrate that furthermore, and allow us to embed a model that fulfills not just fulfilled the pandemic, but post-pandemic now, ultimately. And we very much are now offering staff a 3-2-2-3 offering, which allows staff members and team members to effectively come into the office and essentially work with fellow colleagues. As part of this move, we also removed one complete floor and offer that to one of our acquired companies that we acquired back in 2019. So again, as part of this flexible working offering, we have demonstrated some substantial savings as well.
Fab. Paul, do you want to share some of your insights?
Yeah, of course. So similar to Madassa, actually, we did a similar thing where we engaged with staff. We asked them what they wanted, and we ended up with what we call an agile offer, which available to probably about 2/3 of our staff. So those people are frontline. Obviously, it's hard to be agile, but for most other people, we offer a minimum of 20% of your time has to be in an office, so that people have the choice of doing 5 days a week if they want, but if not, then it's at least a minimum of 1 day a week or 4 days in a month. I also see similar to what you were saying at the start, Rob. So, originally we didn't have much attrition. We weren't losing many people through their own choice to leave for greater pay somewhere else, etc. But that has crept up, not massively, but it has crept up. I think the piece you were saying with the worth it view. So is it what's in it for me? What's the benefit? I think there's a few things now when people are looking for roles, right? It's not just about compensation. It's about the quality of their manager, particularly in a remote world. It's about the work-life balance. It's about the respect they get at work and the recognition. I think at L&Q we need to be honest with ourselves. We're not going to compete with a fintech or a private sector company when it comes to pay and reward. But what we do is we look at what's unique about us to see what people may want and what that could do to attract people. So, we are a company focused on social purpose, and, we hear quite a few people through interviews and those existing staff that stay, they quite like having a purpose and a value that matches what they're looking for. We have a great team. Rob, you've been to our offices. We have some great offices. We've invested quite a lot in making our office experience feel different. And when we do interviews, it's really nice now to be able to bring people to our offices and put them through, what that looks like and what it feels like. So it's not just a remote experience, which is the same as what you get with most companies over Teams. So it's that kind of look and feel, I guess. The other thing that I have heard mentioned, and I don't know whether this has got any legs yet, is the Great Regret has been termed, which is where people do make that jump to leave because it's maybe the salary that they're looking for or a pay bump, and then later they come to regret it. So some organisations we've had this, we get people trying to come back, and it'll be interesting to see if that happens more and more, or whether that's just a here and now thing.
It's an interesting one, though, isn't it? I can kind of imagine people leaving for this concept of, I think particularly if you work in an organisation, it's like, right, we want you back in the office 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or whatever. So that mandatory kind of aspect rather than flexible. You go to an organisation where perhaps you're offered remote work all of the time, and you suddenly realise that the reason remote worked well before is because you knew people, you had social connections with those people because you'd worked with them in the flesh. And you start, I could imagine how this would be for me. You start a role where you're only remote, and actually you've never met those people, and that's a very different reality, I think, to what it could be when you're just meeting your colleagues remotely because you do know them already. So I've not heard that term actually, but it's be interesting. Be interesting. You should copyright that one.
I heard it somewhere else.
So I guess linked to that, and unless anyone else wanted to jump in and have a point on that.
Yeah, possibly worth saying. So I can talk about two elements here. So one is kind of what we're doing at Leithwaite, which is similar to what other people are doing. Most of us are doing now 1 to 2 days a week in the office. Some people might do 2 to 3. We very much set out a cultural expectation of you do what's right for you, and provided that you and your team are happy with it, that's fine with us at a central perspective, and that seems to be working well, and different people are doing different things. We've also found that it's different internationally. So our Hong Kong team, for instance, are pretty much back in 5 days a week at their own choice. but with a bit more flexibility on being able to easily work from home if they want to for a day at any point. Our New York team are mostly not in the office at all yet. Most of them are still working from home completely. So that's definitely a geographic thing. But the other thing I thought might be interesting to comment on, obviously, we are an executive search firm, essentially a recruitment firm. And I think we are seeing this being something that people care about a lot more in the market. So as we move candidates into employment, it is very much one of the things that they want to talk about. They want generally that ability to have hybrid work. It is increasing the geographic flexibility on roles, because some of our clients are more prepared to have someone say, they might have originally have said, we want you in the Paris office, and they're now saying, oh, fine, you want to live in London and just come across every now and then, that's fine, because it's just easier to do that sort of thing. But the other interesting thing, we did a survey of HR leaders earlier this year. And one of the things that came back is that there's a real variation by industry. So in the technology industries, we found that 83% of people who responded said that most of their staff were doing 0 to 2 days a week in the office. Whereas at the other end of the scale, in private equity, it was only 22%. So there's this real variation across different industries. So, media and fintech are more at the technology end of the scale, 60, 70, 80%. Firms like sort of law firms and asset managers and things are maybe around 50%. And then up at the other ends, I say the sort of alternative investments, private equity, people like that are much more on no, we want you back in the office. We went back to exactly how it was before. So that definitely does vary from industry to industry, which I find interesting.
Yeah, is that a publicly available report, or is that something you're?
It is, yeah. No, it's something I can share a link to a post where one of the guys that wrote that report actually pulled it up. In fact, to be honest with you, I looked at his post on LinkedIn to find the stats, so I had them in front of me. So yeah, I can definitely share that afterwards.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm guessing that's something we'll be able to share to everyone. I'm sure the rest of you will probably find that quite interesting, just on the team as well. So if we move on, one of the for any of you that follow Twitter or anything, there was you may have seen on the image that we popped up on the screen. Perhaps we could pop it back up just for a moment. Wackass, if that's okay. There's a guy called Chris Hurd who I think many people follow on Twitter, but he's become quite infamous, I think, for his quite bullish approach, I guess, to talking about the death of the office, right? Which I'm not saying I agree with at all, but he always makes some quite interesting points. And I think one of the points he talks about, thank you, Wackass, that he talks about a lot, is simply how organisations are are struggling to deal with what we do around sustainability and COP26 objectives and CO2 and things, and of course remote work is one great way to cut down on commuting and those kind of things. But also I think what it raises, and if you follow him and look through some of his other tweets and things, he talks about this kind of employee disconnect between what we mean by hybrid work and whether for some, and I've heard organizations say, we do hybrid work, we get people to come in on these days, and you think, well, yeah, that is hybrid work, but is it flexible? For me, I couldn't do a Wednesday generally in the office, without having to rearrange quite a lot of personal things and my children's things. So I guess the question I wanted to ask really was, what are you guys doing about that? How is that terminology used within the organization between a tick box around we allow people to work from home versus real work how you want to, which is a couple of you have mentioned today, and then is that aimed at more towards recruiting of people or retaining the people that you've got to avoid this kind of resignation, or is it kind of a combination of both? I guess the final point, before you answer is, do you use any tools, right, to other than kind of employee surveys to actually capture any of this information about how people are working and what they're doing and what that trend is that these kind of reports talk about? Sorry, lots of debate areas there. Alex, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I can kick off on that one. So sort of picking up on that Twitter thread there, I mean, we have, AWIN has adopted a complete, to a degree, remote first approach. We still have offices, but there is no prescription on how often a user should use that office or go into that office. It's entirely up to the end user. That pretty much started at the beginning of the pandemic, where we tested whether our services would cope, and they did. So it was a very easy decision to switch to sort of remote first. As a result, a bit like what Melissa said, you know, we've in some of our offices we've reduced the amount of square footage that we need. We've adopted more of a hot desking approach for the offices that we have now, and tried to standardise the setup in those offices. So it doesn't matter where you sit. If you want to go into the office, you should have the ability to do so. There is still some juggling in terms of making sure that we don't oversubscribe the number of people that go in. But it's entirely up to the end user or their managers when they want to go into the office. We've also adopted the approach that you can technically work from anywhere. At the moment, that's sort of anywhere where there's an AWIN office, I think more for tax purposes than anything else. But considering that we're pretty geographically spread, that works quite well. So one of our staff, or any one of our staff, could move to Amsterdam for 2 months and decide to just work from there because we've got an office based there, and visit that office if they need to. So that's definitely helped with the feel-good factor, I guess. It has certainly, and we've also, I should say, adopted a 4-day week approach. So it's 4 days, but at full pay. So that's also helped. And that again was on the back of productivity gains, or how people felt off the back of working through the pandemic. To make sure that people are happy with that, we use a Peakon, and we send surveys around to staff, possibly a little bit too frequently, according to my team, just to ask how things are going, and and that's what the business kind of judges whether it's the right approach. And obviously, there's the productivity, and so it's more about measuring output than it is, ensuring that people are sat at a desk, all the time, and that is how we measure it. We measure it by how we perform, really. From a technical perspective, it's made it a little bit more tricky, and we have to adapt the tools that we use so that we make sure that we can get accurate reporting on what people are doing. I'm not too sure on the HR side in terms of whether it's stopped people leaving. We had a relatively high churn rate before, but that's natural apparently for our industry. We have a lot of young people that are it's their first job. They maybe work with some of our clients for 6 months, 12 months, a year, 2 years, and then they typically move on to actually working for us, some of our clients. All I know is that we keep having to buy more licenses, Office 365 licenses, so that's a good thing. And we are steadily growing, I would say. So from our perspective, it's more about measuring, ensuring that you've got the right tools to measure what your team are doing, not spying on them per se, but just ensuring that they have the right tools to do the job, that they're comfortable doing what they're doing, and we haven't found a drop in output from that. So I think as long as you have those in place, it's again, it obviously depends on the industry, and we're lucky in being in sort of the marketing industry that it allows us to do, the media industry allows us to do that. But it certainly worked for us, dropping down to 4 days and essentially, being as flexible as we can make it.
Wow, so you're actually part of the bigger trials? Is something that you just?
No, I'm not aware that we are. Whenever I hear it on the news, I'm a little bit miffed that I never hear my company's name in it. But we've just got on and done it, and so far it's worked. Again, I can only speak from the technical side of the business, but certainly, the fact that our users can work from anywhere, technically at any time, and it's a 4-day week, and the fact that the whole company's adopted it as well. Now, I was concerned when we were first proposing it, well, how would we be able to support users if we're only on a 4-day week, but they're working on a weekend or what have you? Can our SLAs cope? But because the entire company has adopted that approach, we haven't had many issues, or too many issues, with people's tickets not being picked up or problems being resolved. It's a little bit more difficult to ensure that people are around for meetings and things like that. So it's more about training, and we've recently hired a modern workplace champion to try and showcase and evangelize the tools that we already have, so that people can make best use out of ensuring that their calendar's up to date. So that if someone does go and book a meeting, they know that they're not around. Initial pain from realizing that someone's not around, but you soon fall into a routine of knowing pretty much when people are off. So that I typically take a Friday off, and as you said, Rob, Wednesdays are difficult for me to go into the office if I wanted to, but the flexibility definitely helps.
Wow, I mean, this is probably something we could talk about, and maybe we will, at length. And it's interesting actually, because the approach you've taken, and again, really welcome other people's views on it. The approach you've taken, from what you're saying, I think, is that people can work whatever day suits them, right? So it's not like you get every Friday off. It's like whatever day you can just work.
As long as
that mean that people
there are some
work 2 half days one day and not take a whole? Is it
correct?
flexible?
Yeah, it's completely flexible. As long as so we use Microsoft Shifts to kind of book the time off, and that's kind of the only tool that we sort of say that realistically you should use that at a team level to ensure that your team is happy. It's up at the end of the day, it's up to the managers to decide, and there will be instances where we stress in the terms and conditions that there may be instances where you're required to work 5 days a week. Things like Black Friday are incredibly busy for us as an organisation. So, engineers or teams will need to be available if there's certain project work. Like I've had to tell one of my guys that, for the next few weeks, you've got to work 5 days because we're rolling out a new finance system, and it needs to happen on time. And they accept that because you've then got the benefit of, you've got complete flexibility every week, and I don't require, and not many managers require approval for the 4-day week, because you'd be doing it every week. And so as long as we can see, say in shifts, who's on, who's off, and we've also got some automation in play that informs us each morning of who's out, should we say. So if you don't see someone's name in, they're working, but it doesn't matter where they're working from.
Wow. Nice. Madassa sends his apologies. He's had to jump off for an urgent issue. What are your thoughts on that, team? Are any of you in a similar position looking at this? Wowed by that, Dave?
So yeah, I'll jump in there. I think we're a bit behind where Alex and the organisation is. So we're still very much in our blended working trial. So that has continued much longer than we perhaps earlier anticipated through COVID extending out throughout last year. So we're very much still trialing that. But the approach we've taken is that because we're fairly diverse in what we get involved with across Thatcham, one size doesn't fit all. So we've just empowered the management team to define what's right for their teams and their structures. The requirement really is on the managers to coordinate with other managers across the organisation to make sure if they're on a big collaboration project that their teams can work together in the best way that's most effective. We're still very much, we've got people assigned to desks. People still have a physical desk on site.
Mm-hmm.
The guidelines originally was 2 to 3 days in the office. Some are doing that, some are not doing that. But as I say, from my point of view, my team, I just work flexibly with them. I think we've always had that approach. It's perhaps easier to sell that across the business now, allowing people to flex their hours to work according to what suits them and what gives the most effective result for Thatcham, really. We're still focused from the leadership down on values across the organisation, so we're still gaining feedback, getting surveys on that. Our internal HR team are really now pushing the development opportunities, learning platforms, continuing the growth and stuff like that of our colleagues across the organisation with development plans. And we're increasing headcount as well, like others. So that in itself has challenges. We're adding licenses on like others on the team here. But it's very good. I think the challenges will still be there. We still need to work a lot of things out, but very much learning along everyone else with this.
Wow, really interesting. Paul, Roland, any comments on
that? I think with office and remote, I think it's important to look at the benefits of each mode, right? So we've got an office-centric way of working where you've got people together, consistent work experience. You've got those spontaneous moments together where you don't have to have something that is pre-planned as such, and it's really good to have that visibility around others in the office. I feel during COVID my kind of people network has shrunk somewhat because you have less opportunity to see people outside of your direct sphere. And then with kind of staff turnover as well, I've been back into the office a few times, and there's lots of people I don't recognise, never met before. So I think there is a place for working in the office, whereas remote, obviously we've talked about flexibility. When we're at home, we've got more space. We can be a bit more creative because there's less distraction. There's the piece around being able to be there for your family at the end of the day and drop the kids off in the morning and all that good stuff. And I think the way that we manage our teams in those different modes is different as well. So if you're in the office, it's very much visibility, isn't it? So you can see someone, you can see what's going on, which works for some people, doesn't for others. And then when you're remote, it's more about trust. And as someone said earlier, it's about output rather than just anything else. And my view is we need to get both working together. So, look at the activities we do as a team and see what works best in terms of the location for those to take place. So in the office, my view is you can onboard an employee far better in the office. You get that experience of joining a company rather than getting a box through the post. You may be able to do daily scrums on a Teams call, but there are things that where the office, I think, works better. I think it's trying to get to a place where we get both working in harmony and then realize there's a bit in the middle that's really messy. So how do you have people in the office and people remote and try and work at the same time? In the old days, we were all in the office and that was fine. In the COVID times, we were all remote and that was fine. But now it's about trying to work in the middle and have some really good discipline about how this can work for us going forward. And that's tricky. I think we just need to, it's a bit of trial and error, I think, try things, see what works, and then maybe make it better as we go. But, we can't look at either office-based or home-based people as second class anymore. It's, everyone's in that room together when you're collaborating.
Yes, it does. Some really interesting points on there. I think some of the points, and we'll come on to the office actually in a second, sort of the last part really what time for today. But I think that the emphasis on the manager is really important as well, right? I think it's and if you look at, and we'll share the link to the Work Trend Index report again. I'm guessing many of you would have seen it, but it's some really interesting highlights around it if we just look at the visuals. But a lot of it is managers saying they don't feel empowered to make some of these decisions that all of you have talked about around doing that, empower the manager to manage their team. And that's a really, I think, you've brought that home, I think, today on this chat. The index report reports the same thing, right? And actually lots of managers don't feel empowered, therefore they can't empower their employees, therefore you kind of end up with this loop going round. I think the other thing, which and we've covered this before on a previous show, where we've talked about, meetings and collaboration in the office is quite easy. As you say, you grab someone, you walk in a room, you draw on a wall, you draw on a whiteboard, whatever it might be, you do it remotely, that all works well. It's hybrid. Hybrid's harder because you have to be inclusive. And when we think about now what we're seeing, and we saw, and I'm sure I know some of you did this really well, others, we've kind of knee-jerked, right? So I've been into lots of customers where there are, they have video enabled more spaces, right? And by that, they've shoved a laptop at the front with a camera plugged into a big screen, and they kind of call it that's their meeting room, right? And it's awful. Others have kind of done the proper thing. I know many of you have, properly deployed full room systems and, made them very inclusive. But there's lots of spaces that, organizations think about, what do we do, right? And I think it goes way beyond now just video conferencing and meeting room technology, although I think that's a major part of getting it right. But I think, it's about reinventing, and Paul, I know, you've done this really, really well. I haven't been to many of your other offices actually in a little while, and I need to. But, it goes way beyond that. It's about how you rewrite those rules, about, how physical space is used so that it can adapt, right, to the needs of the people and organizations in it. So I think, we're talking about, I guess, in new form factors of furniture, what space have we got? How do we use that space? Do we need more space or less space? Are we closing offices or opening offices? And And then we think about, digital space, right? So we're starting to really, hear about organizations experimenting with, the metaverse, and there's organizations that have now got digital twin clones of their actual offices. So people physically walk in, and it's all a bit kind of, Minecrafty and futuristic, but this stuff is being looked at now in quite a lot of serious detail, how we're using holographics and HoloLens and those kind of things to actually transform this employee experience. So it's going to be a really interesting time, I think, over the next couple of years as we experiment with what this means. So yeah, any kind of thoughts or tips on the things that you've done, what's worked well, what hasn't, what you might do next?
I think so. Whilst obviously I've said that we're technically remote first, what we've also spent a lot of time doing is, as Paul said, making sure that the office is a nice space for people to want to use. But you change the dynamic of what that space is. It's not just a sea of desks anymore. There are more collaborative spaces. There are more private spaces. And one of the things we're doing right this second actually is refurbishing our London office yet again, to kind of put, to reduce the number of desks and increase the number of meeting rooms. When we were all in the office before, what I found really frustrating was actually finding an area where I could go just to make a private call. So you'd book a meeting room out just for that purpose, but you're then taking up an 8-person meeting room for half an hour just for you to have a private call. In the end, we ended up with our server room. Obviously, we were the only people that had access to it, and I'd take myself off into there. We set up a TV in there, and I had the noise of the air conditioning, but it was a private space where we could go to have chats with other members of my team that would be in other locations. So that's what's helped from working remotely. You can have more personal conversations with team members or colleagues or whatever it may be. But it's also important, as Paul's also said, that you do lose an element of, certainly from a manager's perspective, of, to a degree, what the team is working on. Before, a lot of informal conversations would go on, or you'd overhear conversations. So you, as a team, you have a feeling of what's going on and where you were with everything. And that's why I said it's important to ensure that if you do adopt remote working first, is that the tools that you're using allow you to get some of that back, so that we can see on a roadmap of where we are. I don't have to keep chasing people every day because I feel like I'm not connected to what the team is actually doing. And you do lose that. And I don't think the current tools, albeit, you can have impromptu meetings, but you are still kind of, every day is just a sea of meetings. They're not technically meetings. You're just chatting to people, but it's the only effective way that you can do that. But then at the same time, do you go into the office just to have an informal chat with someone? So there's that balance between that I think the team needs to get into. And that, as you say, is the halfway house. And if you can crack that nut, and there's a combination of both, I think you get happy workers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think two comments, if I may. One is around the using different types of day for different purposes. So what we're encouraging is that when people have key documents they're trying to work on, they need to spend a couple of hours thinking about something, you don't come into the office for those days unless it's a collaborative project that you need to be chatting to other people and producing something as a team. That's what you do when you're at home. You can spread things out, you can shut the door, you're not going to get disturbed as much. When you're in the office, what most people are finding now is on the days they're in, they are less productive in terms of sitting there and ticking off the tasks on the to-do list and saying I've got stuff done, because they're cramming a week's worth of water cooler chats into 1 or 2 days in the office. And that means you get interrupted more, but you're kind of using that time as your collaboration time, as you're catching up with people, as your social networking, as you're building that kind of social capital that you then live off the rest of the week when you're at home. So I think just thinking about your days a bit differently and realizing that you don't get that much done on the days when you're in the office because you're using it for purposes, but on the other hand, your days at home can be more productive in terms of output. So your week overall is still a similar level or a bit up on what it was before.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's a really good bit of advice, actually, because you're right. It used to be that, shall I work in the office today? Shall I work from home today? And it was almost what you did was seen to be the same thing. You were just in a different location. And actually, I think what you're saying which is really true, is you do need to think about what it is you're going to be doing and what the tasks are you've got to do, because there are now things, and I've had it before, and Alex, to touch on what you said, where I've come into the office to see people and do things, or maybe to take my team out for lunch or whatever it might be, and I've had to go and do an interview or a private call or something, and you find yourself either, as you say, trying to find a corner somewhere to go in, or walking outside because you need to be private. Or actually, a couple of weeks ago, I literally was like, can I get home in an hour and 25 minutes so I can get home to my office to have my private call, because I don't want to do it in a place where other people can. And that's crazy that's the kind of things that we're doing. So I think you're right. It does kind of make you plan.
Yeah. And then I think the other piece I was going to respond to was about the office real estate. So pre-pandemic, we had an office with 65 desks in, and then we had 9 meeting rooms, of which one had AV capabilities in the form of a double screen at one end, and it wasn't even a full Teams meeting room system. What we now have is about 35 desks, and then a series of more collaborative spaces, round tables and things like that in the main part of the office. And we've also got a couple of just jump into the meeting booths. We don't let people book them. They're literally just there. You can step in. Those have been really popular. People use them for ad hoc one-to-one catch-ups. They also use them for a lot of video or phone or audio calls. In fact, we're getting a couple more of those because they have proved so popular, that ability to just nip in. And they're much, much smaller than a meeting room. In fact, we're even considering the possibility of taking out 2 of our meeting rooms at the other end of the office and replacing 2 meeting rooms with 4 or 5 pods, just because they are really popular, and it avoids people booking a meeting room for a one-person call, which happens a lot. And then
it encourages people to come in more, knowing they've got that. You can come in and have all the great things about being in the office with that ability to have that.
Those calls, which are about, because I think we all do more calls than we used to, because the people at the other end aren't in either, whether they're our own colleagues or whether they're people at our clients. Now, half the time we have a call with a client, and the client's working from home as well. So we've got to deal with that. And then we've also upgraded our meeting rooms. And one of the things we've found there is that dual screen systems are a real improvement. And the reason for that is the way that you can have content on one screen, a PowerPoint deck or something, and all the people on the other. As soon as you are just using one screen and replicating things, if you've got content, your people are tiny. And if you've or you've just got people up there and you're relying on people looking at their own, it's just a lot harder. And so the dual screen systems that we now have, and the fact that you can just whack your Surface Pro on, or you connect from Teams, and then you can really easily share content, that works really well. And so that's another upgrade we've done. So we had a kind of interim halfway through the sort of coming back from pandemic, early 2021, we upgraded all our rooms to have single screen meeting systems. And now we're going through and upgrading another 2 or 3 of them to dual screens, because they're just better.
Yeah, I think as well, you compare that kind of model when you're at home as well. Like, most people have got either their laptop screen, another screen, or 2 screens. And I think, your point about the meetings, right, is when you've got a personal meeting now, you can kind of arrange that real estate how you want it to work for you. Whereas in a meeting room, as you say, it's kind of you're prioritizing one over the other. And dual screen definitely, I think, helps. And we're certainly seeing more of our customers adopting that. And I think also with things like Front Stage, which is rolling out in Teams at the moment, that's really interesting about, trying to bring, people more into that kind of, almost like the old Skype business days of the gallery, right, at the front, but having it a lot more visual when content is being displayed and things. And I think that's just trying to make a much nicer experience. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Is the fact that you have to assume that for every meeting that you do, some people are going to be there in person and some people are going to be remote, and therefore every meeting is a hybrid meeting now. So when we think about sharing notes or whiteboarding, and I still see new whiteboards being put into offices, and it's like and you end up with this on how inclusive is that going to be? Do I need whiteboard capture cameras in rooms and things, or do I actually need to just innovate and educate people to have the competence to use digital whiteboards if they're going to use whiteboarding? Because I think whiteboarding is still a great way of expressing yourself and free flow and those things, rather than kind of pre-canned PowerPoints and those things. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think just making sure everyone knows how to use the technology and has got the confidence in using the technology. I still see people wobble when they have to walk into a meeting and press join, and it's it's always been the biggest bugbear of anybody is can I be, you need to be 100% confident that when you click that join button, it's going to do what you expect it to do. And I think that's we'll probably end it there, but I think that's still something I see as a massive challenge. Fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. It's been really, I've certainly learned some things on there. Roland, thank you for talking about your research. I think we will share that and certainly credit Lathwaites for that piece of work. I think that'd be really interesting. Any final words from anybody before we sign off?
Just for me, I think I'd just like to reinforce bits around that modern workplace, and from a digital and IT perspective, we forget that we're used to using this technology every day, day in, day out, and there's a lot of people across the organisation that are just not as aware of what can happen and how to use this technology. So that training and awareness piece is so important, and we just need to keep embracing that across organisations.
That's a good point to correct it on. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Wakas and the marketing team, thank you again for hosting the show. Listeners, thank you for listening, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.